So let me briefly introduce myself. My name is Hana Usoyan, Hana Omar Khali, and I'm working at the Institute of Iranian Studies here in Berlin. I'm a trained Iranist and Kurdologist. I've studied and worked in three different schools, three different institutes of Iranian studies. First in St. Petersburg, so I finished state Iranian studies at the St. Petersburg University. Then I worked in Göttingen in Iranian studies, and since 2019 I work in Berlin. And I'm a professor of Iranian studies at the institute here. So most of my academic work has so far focused on Kurdish philology and Kurdish culture, but also oral transmission and Iranian-speaking non-mainstream religious communities in and from the Middle East. So, unfortunately, we have to skip the introductory round because of understandable reason of the participants of the lecture. And you know that in this lecture we have two parts from our institute. So the Institute of Iranian Studies is presented here twice. Once in the first session, in the first section, and the second in January. So in this lecture, today's lecture, is divided into two parts. So in the first part, I will briefly introduce you the history of Iranian studies as an academic field, focusing on Germany and particularly on Berlin. And in the second part of my lecture today, we will discuss some issues of memory or remembering and forgetting the past. And for that case, I chose Yazidism as a case study. So let's get started. Some 30, let me probably open that in this way. So some 30 years ago, perhaps 30 years ago, Iranian studies was often perceived what was called in the colloquial German Orchideenfach. Do you know what does it mean? Orchideendisziplin or Orchideenfach. No? Well, it's a kind of small, exotic, unusual field. Well, the situation has changed so far. We may start thinking of development of Iranian studies, though not in an institutionalized form, perhaps with mentioning of the writing of history in Persian, and it's used in Persian, the Arabic term tarikh is used, by authors whose aim was to record and narrate the events of the past and of their own times. For example, Tarikhnameh or Tarikh Bal'ami, the history of Bal'ami, it's a kind of Persian translation, prose translation of Tabari's history, written by Abu Ali Muhammad Bal'ami. He's a 10th century historian. It's called actually Tarikh Bal'ami because besides the just simple translation, prosaic translation from Arabic, he also added his own material, and some information is found in the Tarikh Bal'ami that is not found in Tabari's history. So another example is Tarikh Bayhaqi, the history of Bayhaqi, written by Abul Fazl Bayhaqi, who was the secretary at the Ghaznavid court. And another one, after Tarikh Bayhaqi, you may wonder, why did I add Shahnameh here? Book of Kings, do you know what is Shahnameh? Have you ever heard this name? What is it? Yeah, very good. National epic, right? But very often it is included in the histories or historiographies. Shahnameh from the was written by Abul Qasim Firdausi, and he finished his work in 1010. So Charles Melville correctly writes that in fact there is rather little of the analytic treatment of history in the Persian case. A strong narrative element usually predominates, one feature that distinguishes Persian historical writing from most Arabic works. Once established as the official language of the bureaucracy and the vehicle par excellence for the development and transmission of so-called high literature, Persian was written by choice in the courts of Central Asia, India, and the Ottoman Empire, and Persian works of history and other literature were prompted there. Here, I would like also to mention one of rare cases of a female Kurdish historian and poet, Mahsharab Khanum Kurdistani, known as Masture Ardalan. She was married with the ruler of the principality, Khosrow Khan Ardalan, and used to write in both Persian and Kurdish in the court of the Ardalan principality. I brought for you a few books that I would probably show. This is one of the example translations of Shahnameh Ferdowsi, the prosaic translation in English, you can show. And Masture, I didn't find the book in my office, but I found the novel. So it's a kind of, also I wanted to show that her biography became a source of inspire for the Kurdish novelists, modern novelists. So let us have a look at prominent scholars of Iranian studies in and from Iran, especially during the 20th century. So one of the major scholars, among others, could be mentioned Mirza Ali Akbar Qazvini Dehkhuda, who wrote the Lughatnameh, the largest comprehensive Persian dictionary ever published, in 15 volumes. You see 26,000 pages. And editing and publication of his monumental Lughatnameh were completed after his death, under the supervision of the late Muhammad Moin. Moin himself is the main editor of another important Persian encyclopedic dictionary called Farhang-e Moin, published in 6 volumes. Another person that whom I wanted to mention is Professor Ehsan Yarshater, so the founder and director of the Center for Iranian Studies at Columbia University. And he was the main editor of the book series that was called The History of Iranian Languages. There are 20 volumes are supposed to be, not all are published. This is just one example that I wanted to show to you. So just as an example, of course, there are many scholars whom I could mention, but because of time, I just decided to mention just a few. So the first news about Persia, how it was called in Europe at that time, can be found in various travel notes. Not institutionalized Iranian studies in German-speaking countries, in Germany it's called Iranistik, goes as back as 1654, and the publication of so-called Persianische Rosenthal, that is translation of Saadi's Golestan, the Rose Garden, by Adam Oelschläger, Latinized Olearius. At that time, people were completely fascinated by highly romanticized world and great cultural power that initiated further interest and further research in Iranian studies and in Iran in general. We can start discussing development of Iranian studies at the institutional level in the general context of Oriental studies. At the beginning of the 20th century, many academic studies in various aspects of Persian culture fell in the domain of what was called Oriental studies or Oriental philology, which included, among others, Persian, Arabic, Turkish languages. Research on Iran in German-speaking countries has been primarily stimulated since the beginning of the 19th century by interest in the culture and history of ancient Iran, which was indicated by the publication of the Avesta by the Frenchman Anquetil Duperron, and the cuneiform inscriptions from Persepolis by Karsten Niebuhr. May I ask you, what is the Avesta? William, don't answer. What is the Avesta? Texts, no? Right, Zoroastrian sacred texts that are perceived now as Zoroastrian sacred book or scripture. No, but it's a collection of sacred texts of Zoroastrians. And Zoroastrianism is, what is Zoroastrianism? Yeah.
Perhaps even older than Iranian local religion.
Yeah.
It has, well, I remember that two-headed bird there. Well, I don't remember in detail, but
Okay, two-headed. Yeah, there are many symbols of birds, and probably you mean fravashis or the others. Yeah, good. It's an old Zoroastrian religion, Iranian religion. Is it so local, do you think? Was it local? What do you mean local? Yeah.
It was recorded in Georgia, for example, in the Caucasus, Zoroastrianism was there, so therefore it's not local.
What is local? Local for that time, probably for the Achaemenid Empire, no, which was local. Locality was a bit different, right? But you are right in terms of that. I don't know really about Georgians, but I know about Armenians. That, for example, Armenians were one of the group of people, not Persians, who also were Zoroastrians at that time. No? So it wasn't really as such local, no? But yeah, and Zoroastrian probably emerged in later second millennia, probably emerged in later second millennium, before Common Era, from Indo-Iranian religious traditions. So it was dominant in Iranian-speaking areas up until the rise of Islam. And then it gradually transformed into what could be called a minority status or a non-mainstream religious group. And yeah, it has also a considerable Indian diaspora where the Zoroastrians are called Parsis. So, and I wanted to show you this cuneiform, like one of the first samples of Old Persian cuneiform. The first period of research on ancient Iran culminated around 1900 in the publication of 3 major standard works, which still represent brilliant achievements in German Iranian studies. Oh, you can't hear. Good, sorry. It's too bright just to stay. So the 3 works are the first one, Monumental Grundriss der iranischen Philologie, its outline of Iranian philology by William Geiger and Ernst Kuhn, who collected the knowledge of that time about languages, literatures, and culture of Iran. The second one that I wanted to mention is Avesta, Die Heiligen Bücher der Parsen, the Avesta, the Sacred Books of the Parsis. Is the edition of the Avesta by Karl Friedrich Geldner, and Alt-Iranisches Wörterbuch, Old Iranian Dictionary by Christian Bartolome, that appeared in 1904. And this is the year that is also a turning point in the history of research, because that was when the first texts from the East Turkestan or Eastern Turkestan, which was sensational at that time, were published, and this opened up completely new areas of research in terms of space, culture, and language. Do you happen to know where is it, East or Eastern Turkestan? Which area is meant?
China.
Yeah. Yeah. So it refers to area of Tarim Basin. I can't read really the chart now simultaneously, so it's a bit. So yeah, exactly. You're right. It refers to that area of Tarim Basin in Xinjiang, if I pronounce it correctly. So alongside the Silk Road. And the Iranian studies of the 20th century have, in addition to excavation finds in Susa and Persepolis, and many other places in Iran itself, mainly the discoveries made by numerous researchers in Turfan and other oases of Chinese or East Turkestan. So it was the main basis and main material for the research in German Iranian studies. So yeah, do you know which kind of, have you ever heard about Turfan or Turfan Forschung, Turfan studies? And materials found there? Yeah.
I remember something, but I'm not sure about that. But there were mummies in the Tarim Basin, so I.
Mummies?
Yes.
Mummies.
Mummies.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
I don't know if you're asking about them, but
No.
Basin.
No, about documents found in the beginning of the 20th century. No, I mean, there were, I don't remember how many, but thousands, tens thousands manuscripts and documents were found in there, and they were Uyghur, Persian, Sogdian, Syriac, but also Middle Persian manuscripts that were found, and especially, and I think they were brought, practically all of them are in the Berlin Library. and also in the Academy of Science. So, yeah, until the First World War, most scholars followed the traditions of the 19th century, when important translations and more or less reliable editions of classical Persian texts had been published. Persian poetry was particularly popular among the German-speaking public in the 19th century and the first decades, also in the first decades of the 20th century. From the beginning of the 20th century, when development of academic disciplines started, especially such languages as Arabic, Persian, Chinese, etc., were studied in the frame of either Oriental studies or Oriental philology. The separate academic disciplines, such as Iranian studies, Islamic studies, didn't exist at that time. The separate academic disciplines, didn't exist, so in an institutionalized form. And historic philological disciplines were based mainly on the languages and the study of textual traditions. As an example, we can recall Professor Karl Heinrich Becker, who became one of the first professors for Islamic studies with a focus on cultural historical studies, not only philologist. He also strengthened and developed cultural and historical aspects in Islamic studies. It took time until Iranian studies institutionally separated itself from Oriental studies. The start of the 20th century was a turning point in research concerning Iranian matters. Efforts were made to integrate research on various Iranian themes that had previously been rooted in diverse disciplines. So regarding Iranian studies, Fragner mentions three scholars, Hans Heinrich Scheder, Wolfgang Lenz, and Walter Hinz. Prior to Second World War, Scheder held a chair for Iranian studies in Berlin, and after the war for some years in Göttingen. Hinz was then professor holding the same chair in Göttingen until the 1970s, and Lenz held the same position at the University of Hamburg. Rather early in their careers, these three scholars transformed their philological scope in favor of wider perspectives. And I quote Fragner, Scheder, a former pupil of the famous specialist in Islamic studies Karl Heinrich Becker, whom I mentioned a few minutes ago, opened up his mind to comparative concepts in cultural history and searched for Iranian components within the great lines of human cultural development throughout world history. To Lenz, the actual and contemporary socio-cultural conditions of Iranian peoples were the proper subject of his field, Iranistic, and Iranian philology represented a means rather than an end. End quote. Walter Hinz, who was the professor in Göttingen, developed an approach to research in Iranian history and hitherto had been rather alien to the view of traditional German Orientalists. He dealt mainly with late medieval and early modern history of Persia and so-called Middle Period. Two younger scholars of Islamic studies, namely Hans Robert Römer and Berthold Spöler, who were both students of Hinz, cooperated with him and later became prominent representatives of this tradition. Spöler concentrated namely on the early Islamic history of Persia and on the Mongol period. Römer, like Hinz, specialized in post-Mongol times. So let us now have a look at the methodological, geographic, and time frame of Iranian studies. So you know that in our ISME program, we very often repeat and emphasize that it's a strongly interdisciplinary study. To make the situation even more complicated, you have to know that Iranian studies are, as a discipline itself, is also highly interdisciplinary. Of course, it emerged from Iranian philology and still dealing with the analysis and with the sources written in Iranian languages. By the way, which Iranian languages do you know? Persian, Kurdish, what else? Tajik. Is it the Persian language? Or the dialect? Or the variant? What is Tajik?
What do you mean by Kurdish?
Oh, I thought, what do you mean by language? Yeah, it's extremely complicated. What is language and what is dialect? What do I mean by Kurdish?
Yeah.
I mean the Kurdish language.
Like the
With
Kurdish.
different dialects like Kurmanji, Surani, perhaps Gorani and Zaza, they are discussable. But as languages, yeah, in general, like Kurdish with all the possible dialects, we have Persian, no? But we have also old Iranian languages, middle Iranian languages, and new Iranian languages, no? Quite an artificial, of course, division, but still, this is what we have. And there are different, not all, of course, no, languages that might be seen that belong to Iranian languages. So the work done in Iranian studies in the last few decades has made it possible, however, to develop from what was originally a predominantly philological subject into a cultural historical Iranian studies field, which endeavors to apply the methods and knowledge of other disciplines, such as religious, social, legal, and literary studies, as well as the theoretical methods developed in the context of anthropological or gender studies. And now I wanted to show to you, maybe you could help me and show these two books, green, 2 volumes of handbook of Iranian studies. You can see the first volume, and a few years later, the second volume was published, appeared. It is in German, but still you might see the content and see what are the chapters, what are the disciplines that are covered there, like history, literature, language, religions, but also architecture, also manuscriptology, and art, of course, art is, yes. Yeah, that's right. And also you can see that the second volume added few further chapters dedicated to music and something else. You can see now this. You can imagine how bright the Iranian studies is or could be. So geography, the subject of investigation in Iranian studies. What do you think? Which geographical? About which geographical area do we speak, do you think? If the online participants want to be involved, are there some problems? Yes.
Yeah, no, there's no problem. It's just, yeah, the online participants would like to participate because when you asked a question, for instance, about Georgia, there was. Yeah, so I would just
how is it with the questions? We can do it the question session at the end, or just now?
No, I mean, please, when you ask a question, just consider that there are people wanting to also maybe answer. Just have a look on the chat. I will
Unfortunately,
just
I can't have a look at the chat and simultaneously read the chat, right? You can just ask. Oh, that would really disturb me a bit. So if you have the questions, please do note them, and we can come back because we will have time at the end. Surely, it will just a bit, make a bit complicated, not to follow the chat.
I think so, yeah.
But of course, I take you into consideration. I didn't forget you.
Okay, so then maybe please, when you ask a question, I just ask the participants to just jump in and answer if this is okay for you to answer your question, because they are less
please do. Without writing anything in the chat. That would help. Just ask.
Okay.
Bitte. So geography. About which geographical span do we talk about? Which geographical area do we talk when we talk about Iranian studies, do you think? Is it Iran? Is it this area of Islamic Republic of Iran, or it's something else? Exactly. Influences is a very important word, right? And how bright it is. It's an extremely vast geographical area, right? I didn't have the good example, but I brought just few maps like Achaemenids and Sassanians, so you can see the broad possible influences. So we talk about the area, like you said, cultural, but also the area where the languages, Iranian languages, were spoken or are spoken, and where the written testimonies were found. No, we can say so. So time span. What about the time span? Where do we start when we say Iranian studies?
If we are looking at it from the linguistic, maybe we can talk about the time that the Iranian language is learned. Or if we talk about it from the state, that economics.
But we have to cover everything, right? Because we understood that it's not only philological discipline. It started to emerge as a philological area field, but no, not anymore, because it covers actually different aspects. So the time span considered of Iranian studies is usually divided, for Iranian studies, is usually divided into two sections or two parts. So the first part is pre-Islamic Iran, the second one is Islamic time and Islamic Iran up to modernity. So, but this division is extremely, of course, artificial, right? Because how can we understand some modern times or early classical developments, no? From, I don't know, 8th, 9th century, without knowing what they inherited, no? So in terms of continuity and discontinuity, it's extremely important to overcome this gap. But in any way, very often it is, Iranian studies is divided into two areas, pre-Islamic and Islamic area. So I just showed few here dynasties, but they of course don't cover the time span that I mentioned. So at the present time, how many Iranian studies institutes do exist, do you think, in Germany? How many Iranian studies exist as institutes in Germany? Or let's say in German-speaking countries? Do you know? Well, say Berlin at least. Where else? How many do you think in general? 10, 2, 1? Yeah. 5, very good. In which? 5, it was like... yeah, very clever, right? 5, you're right. Yeah. Well done. Well, there were a bit more, but there was a tendency, a strong tendency to incorporate smaller institutes into a larger departments like Islamic studies or Middle Eastern studies, etc. So what we have nowadays are these 5 universities, right? And the oldest one, do you think, which one? Göttingen, very good. I didn't write it. Very good. So Göttingen is the oldest one, but I said it, right? So we have 5 institutes of Iranian studies, separate institutes, but it doesn't mean that Persian language or different aspects of Iranian studies are not studied in other institutes. So Iranian studies was not one of the subjects that were established as an independent discipline immediately after the Free University of Berlin was founded. Do you know when was it founded? How old we are. Actually, 2 days ago, there was a birthday.
75 years.
75 years. Two days ago, it was in 1948, no, when it was founded. But Iranian studies was not part of it. The subject at the Friedrich Wilhelms Universität, which was later renamed Humboldt University in East Berlin, Iranian studies was part of it as a subject, not institute. At that time, Heinrich Juncker, a student of Christian Bartholomä, and Paul Horn represented Iranian philology. Iranian studies at the FU, however, remained closely connected to the Indo-European linguistics and Indology, being a sub-department of Indo-European studies. Extensive new discoveries of Iranian evidence at the beginning of the 20th century in Turfan and the expansion of Iranian studies beyond philology to a cultural historical discipline made the independence of the subject a kind of scientific necessity. In 1953, the Indo-European seminar at the FU was divided into 2 areas, the Indo-Germanic department and the Indo-Iranian department. When Hansen was given a full professorship in the early 1960s, the first step towards establishing Iranian studies as an independent subject was taken, and in 1963, the Seminar for Iranian and Indian Philology was founded and was represented by 2 separate professorships. Hansen's main focus was Middle Iranian Studies, philology. So in 1968, Carsten Kolpe from Göttingen was appointed to the chair of the Seminar for Iranian Philology. A second professorship was filled in 1970 by Günther Gobrecht. With the appointment of Kolpe, the subject was significantly expanded to include a religious historical focus, which was given additional weight by the establishment of the special research area, which was called syncretism in Iranian studies, which was inherited from Göttingen. Göttingen was a kind of one of the institutes at that time where different religious groups were also studied. In 1978, the subject was expanded to include Kurdish studies under Iranian studies, with a focus on the study of language and literature. The fall of the Berlin Wall in the autumn of which year? 1953? 2003? Which year? 89, right, yeah. Brought the emerging of the two German states in 1990 and also strengthened the collaboration between two institutes of Iranian studies in Humboldt and in Freie University. And in 1999, during the formation of large departments, Iranian studies was added to the newly formed Department of History and Cultural Studies, where you now study. Research on pre-Islamic Zoroastrian law and its influence on the development of other legal systems, such as Islamic, especially Shiite law, was an essential focus available at the Berlin Institute of Iranian Studies. Numerous testimonies in Iranian languages were written by the Manichaean communities in Central Asia, Turfan, between the 3rd and 14th centuries, and which form the basis for the research on Manichaeism, also here. What is Manichaeism?
It's a belief system which was accepted by the people of the Taran Basin. And it also had a specific writing system, which the many texts still, I think, exist. There are also illustrations included in this.
Yeah.
It's a
vegetarian religion.
I remember.
Yeah, this is a kind of mark, no? Kind of important sign of it. Well, Manichaeism is a syncretic religion, we can say, developed by Prophet Mani, who lived in 216-274 Common Era, based actually, we can say, on Jewish, Christian, Zoroastrian, Buddhist roots. And it was presented as a superior interpretation of Zoroastrianism, but also it had a kind of universal character. At least it was expected to have this. And initially, as you said, successfully spread in Sasanian and Roman empires, and then was persecuted. And do you think it's a living tradition at the moment? Do we have Manichaeans? Are you sure? No, you're right. There are no Manichaeans, but there are neo-Manichaeans. Some, I've heard. With the coming of the new director of Iranian Studies, Professor Alberto Cantera, the Institute of Iranian Studies in Berlin focuses on the study of the Zoroastrian textual tradition and manuscriptology, but also ritual tradition. You will probably, and I hope you will see him on 16th January, I think, the second week or third. You will see him in January. And he will present also some of the projects. So it hosts, the Institute hosts some international and leading projects related to the study of the Iranian world in antique and late antique periods. One of it I wanted to show to you here. It's the Corpus Avesticum Berolinense, CAP, represents the first attempt to edit the entire Avestan Zoroastrian textual corpus within its ritual context, and to produce and offer both printed and digital editions of the texts. You can actually also enter it online. It is an open, not everything, but a lot of things. You can have a look at our website. So it also includes the Avestan Digital Archive, previous one. So the second project that is run at the Institute is based on the creation, aims to create the Zoroastrian Middle Persian corpus and dictionary. And it is run in collaboration between three universities, Göttingen, Cologne, and Bochum. So research area in the second major area Islamic period, and modern times, focuses on classical and modern Persian literature, on Kurdish language, oral traditions, and the history of Iranian-speaking religious non-mainstream groups, such as Yazidis mainly, but also Ahl Haq and Zaza or Kurmanji Alawi speaking Alawis. Could you please show the next book, probably? This is one of the examples that we do, no, our research. So I would now like to move to our next part. Yeah, we have time. So to move to the next part of my talk, within the world of Iranian studies, and including Kurdish studies here, there had been relatively little focus on memory as an object of investigation. There are various ways of forms of recollecting the past. For example, through oral literature, music, folklore in a broader sense, creation of archives, monuments, city planning, memorials, no, etc. And in this case, and here I would like to also share with you, show to you some further books on oral history. Yeah, I think these are more theoretical works that might be interesting for you to have a look. So, yeah. So when reading scientific literature, you may come across and sometimes come across different terms and sometimes interchangeable terms that may be important, like memory, communicative memory, individual family memory, post memory, counter memory, cultural memory, collective memory, oral history versus probably factual history, etc. So since any recollecting of the past is it a written or in a oral form, cannot be objective and is highly selective, all types of media, written, print, oral, technologically mediated ones, and different approaches are important to be analyzed altogether in order to better understand how people perceived or perceive and how they make use of their own past. And before we proceed to the main part to discuss the case study of Yazidis, I wanted to mention a few points that might be important for you also. So they are organized remembering and organized forgetting. And later I will just mention the flow of tradition as a concept. Have you ever heard about organized forgetting and organized remembering processes?
I heard about active ignorance.
Active ignorance. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Perhaps we have a lot of also interchangeable terms, right, and concepts, but might mean probably the same. The importance of the ideological state in the manipulation of public discourse is undeniable throughout the Iranian cultural zone. Many of the governments practice what Paul Connerton calls organized forgetting, as well as organized remembering. And here we can recall the constant adaptation or rewriting of school books in Iran, but of course not only Iran. Modern Iran forbids publications what is not in harmony with their teachings by using the means of developed censorship policy. Moreover, wherever regime change happens, calendars rather than maps are reshaped or apt to be redrawn with new festivals of celebrations, with new dates of mournings, and time is reconfigured with the new key dates. Yeah, and all heroes may be rejected, old enemies could be rehabilitated, in these processes. So in cases where an authoritarian government forbids certain types of narrative and tries to control what should be remembered and forgotten, so-called counter-memory, to use Foucault's term, which is often correspondence with what we can call popular memory, can respond by using various strategies, such as music, dance, or genres such as lullabies. So the genres which usually circulate in the private domain. So counter-popular memory in such a context could be perceived as act of resistance. And one of the example I wanted to bring, very briefly mention the Kurdish Dengbeji tradition. Vedat, you may probably know what is the main content, but the main content.
So Dengbeji refers to the traditional telling stories accompanied with music.
Which kind of stories?
Those can be stories of war, those can be stories of migration, those can be love stories.
It's heroic, historical, and romantic narratives, but very often they are based on real. This is very important aspect: real, historical, and heroic stories, and very many themes are based on the inter and intra-tribal conflicts, but also conflicts with the government. In that case, we have this preservation of the local history, we can call it, as oral history of the Kurds, but which is not very much supported by both the Turkish government, but also by the Kurdish newly government or by Kurdish groups.
Yeah, it was like forbidden to have some reports.
Was forbidden. Now there are attempts to control anyhow the content. Yeah. But what I want to say, that's always the content is very much contra, no? Anyhow, it's a kind of act of resistance. They want to preserve their own local history, which is not very much which is very often against the what could be named official representation of history. Yeah. So then Ellison correctly points out that processes of forgetting and or remembering are situated in different contexts and are often initiated by interested groups. For example, some facts are formally adopted as part of the official representation of history by dominant groups, while some local facts are remembered and recalled by the minority groups. I mean here quantitatively minority group, and could be excluded from official history. So there are hegemonic attempts to control memory and popular attempts to resist this control. Another aspect, quite important one, what is not said, what is not remembered, what is forgotten, what is silent, is also quite an important point for us to analyze why it is forgotten, why it is not said. So another concept that I wanted to bring here is flow of tradition. Might help you to understand the full process of transmission of knowledge. What factors influence remembering and forgetting processes in the collective memory? Some texts, for example, that could be transmitted, memorized and transmitted through centuries, even millennia, and some are forgotten. Why does it happen? It's believed that collective memory has its limitations, and there is such term or concept called flow of tradition, was, I think, coined by Leo Oppenheim in 1964, Der Strom der Tradition, which only preserves what is relevant at a time and place with regard to community material. So you see this Assmann's works, Jan Assmann, maybe you have heard his name. If not, I would recommend you to read it. I think it has been translated in so many languages, in Turkish, in Russian, in, I don't know if it's translated in Persian, but he and his wife, Aleida Assmann, have a lot of publications on what is called cultural memory and collective memory. So as an example could be, again, some traditional and work songs. We have a lot of Kurdish traditional work songs that are just forgotten because this practice stopped, no? Because of change, social change, etc. Or for another example could be set there are many examples, but one of it, like Yazidi religious text that was forgotten in the post-Soviet areas, in post-Soviet states, because the practice stopped. This text was used to be recited if the person was supposed to to fall into the altered state of consciousness and start to foretelling something, or remember his or her previous lives, not previous incarnations, because Yazidis believe in incarnation. So this practice probably was forbidden in the communist Soviet regime to be practiced. And so that's why the text also that was supposed to be recited during this practice also was forgotten. So there are different reasons for that. Or for example, court literature, no? Qasidas that were panegyrics, they also changed their content. So they have consequently either been forgotten or have begun to be replaced by newly composed, more relevant for the time, for new realities, material, still created within the framework of traditional norms, but responding to the interests of new listeners. So now I would like to talk about Yazidis, my case study that I brought as case study. You can probably also show these books that are not related to Yazidism, but are related to orality and literacy. And I would like to show to you not the differences, but I would like to discuss this transmission from orality to writing and what happens with the memory, what happens with the texts, what happens with the exegetical tradition, which kind of transformations does it undergo when the tradition, predominantly oral tradition, is transmitted into writing. No? So, since the topic of memory and forgetting is incredibly broad and covers different areas of knowledge and disciplines, I decided to take this one sample to show to you this transmission from oral to written. And this is also the online publication that I just printed it out, that appeared last year in Harvard by in Oral Tradition Journal. That is also related to the transmission of knowledge. Yeah, it's just, it's an online one in the open access also, just to show. So, do you know what is Yazidism? Yes.
Because I studied history. Yazidi religion.
I didn't ask why, no? So
Sorry.
you're very welcome.
Well, it's a it's not a monotheistic, but a polytheistic religion, and it centers mainly around a figure called Melek Taus, and it's like duality in that religion. The good God and the bad.
I just would like very much to know where did you study it, but yeah, a bit complicated. No,
These figures and
they don't believe in the existence of devil at all. Absolutely not. No, everything is no.
There's not
No. Even no a kind of evil spirit. No, it doesn't exist. They deny it. They deny the existence even, and explain the bad things that happened with the people differently. No, no, but yeah, good. Let me just say a few words. I'm not going to tell you about what they believe in, but if we have time, we can talk about it later in the discussion part. Just a few words about them. Yazidism is based in the Kurdish-speaking areas of the Middle East and the Caucasus, as well as in Europe. And one of the largest diaspora communities is in Germany. As Yazidis have not a written sacred book, as Yazidis don't have the written sacred book, they are not considered by the Muslims the people of the book. How is it called? How it is called in Arabic? People of the book. And what does it mean? That they have the book. Yes, the sacred book. So how many they are? Which groups are actually considered as people of the book? Yeah, well, yeah, and yeah. Yazidis are not, no, are not considered to be. And you know probably that from August 2014 onwards, the Yazidis of Shingal, Arabic Sinjar, have become subjected to severe persecutions by the Islamic State, who considered them to be kafir, infidels, and which many countries afterwards, and this year in January, Germany as well, have officially recognized as genocide, the crimes against them. So the absence of the written sacred book, one scripture, doesn't actually mean that they don't have sacred texts at all, right? Probably. Do they have sacred texts? What is text? No? Again, discussion. Whatever you say, you should be careful with the text, with the terms.
They have Qawl.
Qawl, for example, they have religious hymns that have been predominantly transmitted orally, verbatim, from one generation to the next. So, the Yazidi religious tradition, both sacred texts and priestly learning, was memorized and transmitted orally from one generation to the next in a non or semi-literate milieu until recently. Apart from Armenia, Soviet Armenia, it was not, and Georgia partly, it was not until the mid-20th century that literacy became widespread among Yazidis, at least Yazidi males, and started to affect community culture. Furthermore, a large percentage of Yazidi inhabitants of Turkey, and somewhat later many Yazidis from Iraq, migrated to Western Europe in the second half of the 20th century. The development of increased literacy accelerated acceptance of many Western ways and concepts, which was to lead to a profound change in the way of leadership, the leadership of the community thought of and defined their religion. Yazidism is also responding to modernization and exploiting the new technologies that make it possible to mass produce and publish Yazidi religious texts. The media have brought new, non-traditional vehicles or media for transmission of the religious knowledge, which have consequently caused major shifts in the status of authority. So before, the religious texts were memorized only by a special group of people, priests or performers of the religious texts, and were transmitted orally only. So this is the change, no? And whereas orthopraxy and the individual spiritual authority of hereditary religious leaders had traditionally been key factors defining the Yazidi religion, now questions began to be asked about general religious principles and teachings, and about the basis of religious knowledge and authority general. Can you tell me what is orthopraxy and orthodoxy? What's the main difference? Of course, yeah, it's also quite a artificial division, no? We don't have purely orthopractic tradition or orthodoxic, yeah.
Orthodoxy is the practice that is focused mostly on faith or belief, and orthodoxy are the practices, traditions that focus on the performance of rituals.
Rituals, performance of rituals, correct performance of the religion, correct doing of the tradition, repetition of doing the tradition, and here explaining and understanding the tradition. Right. And Yazidism, we can say that it has been probably strongly based on the orthopraxy until nowadays, no? And there is a very strong now development and tendency towards orthodoxy, because younger generation who grew up, but also much more important, who are socialized in the European diasporas and in the Western they might they often raise the questions about these teachings. They want to understand why and not understand how. So many Yazidis, both in the Middle East and Armenia and in the diaspora, I say diaspora, so European, West European diaspora, Armenia, of course, also could be considered as diaspora, now regard the lack of a written tradition as a severe impediment to the religious emancipation of the Yazidi community. So they see that if it is just in the memory, kept in the memory, the knowledge, so this is a kind of very big obstacle for the development of the tradition. But not all Yazidis believe in that. Given that a few sacred hymns began to be committed to writing, do you know when? When the first Yazidi, well, Yazidism, it's quite difficult to say where is the start point of the tradition, but one of the documentation of Yazidism, we can say it was documented in the 12th, 13th century. It was reformed probably on the basis of the older tradition, but still, even 800 years of transmission, at least, of the texts, of the religious texts. When do you think they were first time committed to writing? Is it a manuscript? Is it printed? Or when was it the first time? Doesn't matter by whom, Yazidis themselves or not. Can you imagine when? Just guess.
4th century.
Fourth century. Fourth.
It's
Okay.
Maybe it's like 19.
Did they exist at 4th century? I just wonder.
Maybe.
We don't. Well, my reaction doesn't say anything. 19th century could be. Well, do you have others? And now the online participants can also interrupt and tell their opinion. What do you think? What is logical? Yeah, somewhere in the 15, 19 could be no centuries, but Vedat is looking so suspicious. The end of the 20th century. It's 1978, 1979, when the first collections of the texts were. It was a kind of secret. It's not a secret, but it was not allowed. It was prohibited to publish, to print, to write even the texts. No, and yeah, the first time the texts have to be were committed to writing in end of 1970s. Until then, it was predominantly oral. No, just writing down and publication of the Yazidi texts. Yeah, analysis and scientific work came just later. Nothing.
But it's the same situation as like
Yeah.
Like it was like the 19th
Zaza.
or something.
Yeah, Ahle Haq started a bit earlier, Yarsan tradition with the manuscript tradition. Alevis, Zaza speaking Alevis later, but still a lot of things is transmitted orally. And Yazid is just the end of 20th century, we can say so. So they started, wait a second, I will find just where I was. Yeah, and it was the first time when Yazidi texts started to be written down and published. And afterwards, this initiated the process of further publication of the texts. And this gives actually us a unique opportunity to observe how the tradition is transmitted into writing and what's happening actually. How are the reactions of the priesthood? What's happening with the authority? Because you can imagine this all religious knowledge, very important for the community, was based in the hands or was kept in the memories of the authorities, religious authorities, and by publication of them, making them more available to everyone, they lost their authority, or the authority changed. No? The same happens with Dadas, if you know, or happened through the publications. They lose the authority and struggle for that. So, and nowadays, what is also very interesting, they started to discuss this scripturalization process, initiated the debates, internal emic debates in the community of creation their own canon, their own sacred book. Can you imagine? We can observe it. All these discussions, all these levels, different groups, questions of authority, corpus of the text, etc. So, though various written traditions existed and exist among Yazidis, but mainly written tradition is in Arabic. Oral tradition is in Kurdish. So the only means for storing knowledge has been the memory of the reciter of the religious texts. As Asman writes, there are no other ways to access the knowledge aside from the established forms of its performance. So ensuring repetition is a structural necessity. Without repetition, the means of knowledge transmission would cease and novelty would mean oblivion. However good the memory of a reciter is, it can be kept up only through the regular repetition of the entire repertoire. Stopping this repetition means running the risk of partially or completely forgetting the texts that have been memorized with such great effort. Andreas Hussein has diagnosed a general fear of amnesia and a loss of confidence in the future, which has led people to place their faith in archiving and Kuber technology. Yazidism is not an exception. Let us look at the processes that were initiated by the Yazidis themselves very briefly and discuss the creation of the canon. So with the scripturalization of Yazidis texts started in the late 1970s, actually in Baghdad and Yerevan and Moscow, 3 collections were published. There have been attempts among Yazidi intellectuals to systematize, to reformulate, and to partly standardize and even unify the Yazidi religion, but also write down the orally transmitted exegetical tradition. So the commentary tradition was also transmitted orally, and they started to print it out also. So the last point is when you ask about scientific work, among Yazidis themselves, analysis of religious texts, this is something that we see nowadays. An explicit theology, because theology is quite a complicated term. We can't use it easily about Yazidis because, yeah, everything is oral, and they are started to write it now. So, and the last point, as I said, these initial stages of scripturalization and all these processes started and initiated or have become one of the reasons for raising the question of forming a canon. Why do you think it is important for the Yazidi community to create their own sacred book? Why do you think? What could be the main reasons for that? Mm-hmm. Migration, new environments, diaspora, mm-hmm. Amnesia, mm-hmm. Fear of that, yeah, of course, no. What could it be now? Mm-hmm. Is it not the same? Partly, no? They are connected. This fear to lose, no, because of this diaspora, because of this migration, but also older generation is lost anyhow. Not lost, but this intergenerational communication is anyhow interrupted because of different reasons: economic, linguistic. Even the older generation grandparents speak mainly Kurdish or other languages, and the younger generation, the grandchildren speak mainly European languages. No, there is no really such a fluid as before intergenerational knowledge transfer. Yeah, this could be the preservation, one of it, very important. What else? What is historical aspect, quite important. Remember what happened with Yazidis, or what used to happen with them in the Middle East, in Sinjar, in Shingal. Why they were accused, actually. What was the main accusation? That they are kafir, infidels. Because they don't have the book. One of the reasons, right? Yeah, and this is also very important to mention that it's not a new discourse among the Yazidis. It happened also before. They used to discuss it already like 40 years ago. They really initiated a kind of process of creation. There might be other reasons for that, like illiteracy, fear, a kind of living there are many social, political, historical reasons for that, I think. And of course, literacy as well. Yeah. So there are different reasons, I must say, for creation of the canon. But this taboo, there was also this taboo, a kind of prohibition of writing down and publishing the text. That prevented, of course, the Yazidis to publish and print the text before. So now they discuss the creation of the canon, and the use. Do you know what do they use in Kurdish? Which word when they talk about canon creation? They discuss it explicitly, talk about it. Which word they might use? Well, Kurdish is also very much influenced by the Arabic terms and language. Do you know the word? Kitab is very good, book, but when they talk really about canon, they use the word qanun, which is translated as canon, or translated as what? Rule, norm, constitution. Okay, you went too far. But yeah, of course, qanun is also constitution or law. No, but law, actually, norm, rule. Do you know where does it come from? Arabic? Qanun is Greek, but in the Greek language it came from? Nope. Semitic languages. It came from Semitic languages, at least we think so, that it came from Semitic languages into the Greek canon, and then again traveled further, I suppose, into. So in Persian, in Kurdish, I don't know, in Turkish perhaps also. But yeah, in many languages now in the Middle East, we use the word qanon in this meaning as the canon. Nowadays, no, it changed also its meaning. Before it was the instrument of measurement only, and then it also, yeah, had another meaning, rule or norm. And you know that the Bible actually, the church discussed the canon like 2 centuries, maybe a bit more, without even using the word canon, right? The word was not used, but the discussion of the concept of the canon was like 2 centuries at least. So, but the Yazidis use the word kanun, and for the book kitab, as you said, and they perceive it as being a set of rules and laws, dastur, for all Yazidis. This is something that they think it is important to create a kind of source of law and normative behavior for the past, present, and future. It's likely that because of the absence of a centralized religious authority in Yazidism, it would be complicated to initiate this process. And these are the processes that, or these are the questions that are discussed by the Yazidi community nowadays. So what textual corpus, codification, unification, and of course standardization of the tradition of the language. Because it's orally transmitted tradition, or it was the orally transmitted tradition, there are more than 30, at least 30 variants of one text, or what is perceived as one ideal text. Which variant should be taken into this collection, no? So the different environments in which Yazidi communities live have also affected the reasons for the appearance of the discussions of the canon that we already briefly discussed. So in Iraq, mainly, they discuss largely, so their discussions are largely a means to achieve recognition of Yazidis as people of the book, so Ahl al-Kitab. So that's why they need this, or they explained it, that they need to create this book. And so in a way, they connected also this existence of the book with the safe existence. In the Europe and in Armenia, they have a strong need for explanations and unification of religious dogma that are expected to accompany the canon. So I would like now to finish my talk with a general conclusion. So our standpoint from which we look at the past affects our understanding. We reinterpret the past in order to use it in the present. That is, past has no longer the role of telling us what happened. It's not just about the material, but it takes an active role. Thus, this, in general, I will say, cultural heritage is not just a matter of preserving the remains of the past. Rather, it's largely a matter of interpreting their socio-cultural significance. So thank you very much for your attention, and we have a few minutes for a discussion.